Hello, everybody. It is Professor Parish, and this is English 122, Week 2. So I hope you guys had a wonderful first week of classes. If you have not watched the lecture video for Week 1, it is down here in our announcements, and also the introduction video for class is right here. So for Week 2, I'm going to be posting this lecture video in our announcement section as well. We've got a lot to cover this week, so I want to go ahead and just dive right in. I am in current student view, which means I'm seeing the class like you all are seeing it. So what I'm going to do is go to our course content, and then once I'm at course content, I'm going to scroll down here real quick. This box here is a little bit deceptive because don't pay any attention to it. It is literally just there on my SIC to remind you about assignments, but it only lists 2 at a time. And I don't like that about that because there's going to be some weeks in this class we have more than 2 assignments. So instead of relying on this box, don't do that. Just scroll down to Week 2. As you can see here, Week 1 is still open because I'm recording this Sunday night. Once you get to Week 2, you'll see that there are actually 3 assignments due this week. So if you relied on this little gray box up here, it would lead you astray. So I want to go down to Week 2. In our textbook, we are going to be going through chapters 1 through 4 today. So chapter 1 was assigned last week for reading. Chapters 2, 3, and 4, the page numbers are listed here. These chapters are big, but you'll notice in our textbook, most of these chapters are example stories, example short stories, example texts, things like that. These pages here, 56 through 60, 91 to 96, and 135 to 40, have all the terminology and kind of an overview of each chapter. So those are the portions of chapters 2, 3, and 4 that I want you to look at this week. And then, of course, watching this video, we're going to go over the terminology. In our concise handbook, pages 10 through 16 are talking about the rhetorical situation, so the means and the situations in which we write. So if you did not look at that section in English 121, this is just a refresher for you to just look through that and kind of see. But we're going to talk about paper 1 as well. So as far as assignments are due, your discussion forum for this week, the posts are due by Friday, your responses are due by Sunday. And then we have reading response number 1 and the thesis assignment, which is going to be, both of these are going to be due Sunday. So let's talk about these assignments real quick before we get into the paper guidelines. You'll notice that these boxes have a little check mark beside them. Once you submit the assignments, those boxes will be checked, which means that your assignment is completed. So that's a nice way of kind of keeping track of where you are. Let's pull up reading response number 1 here and let it load for us. Okay. So reading response number 1 is actually going to be about a story in our textbook, and it is Ernest Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants. I love this story. This story is, believe it or not, almost 100 years old. But it does not feel like that. It feels like something that some writer could have written a year ago and published. So we're going to talk about this next week after everybody has turned in their assignments. But I want you to basically read this story, Hills Like White Elephants, on pages 316 to 319. And once you read the other chapters in our book, this story will make a lot more sense. And then you're going to be, at the end of that story on page 320, there are 5 questions in the receptive reader portion. You're going to answer questions 1 through 5 in the receptive reader portion, and those question answers are going to be submitted as your reading response number 1. You can type these answers out as long as it's in a PDF, a Word document, or rich text format. You can submit those. If you have Pages, you're going to have to convert it to a Word document. If you use Google Docs, you're going to have to download it as a Word file or a PDF and submit it from your computer. But that's pretty much it. It's just 5 questions about the story. So once you have those answered, you can upload the file. What you do for uploading, if you're not familiar, is you just click Upload a File. You're going to choose your file from your computer. The nice thing about my SIC is that they save all of your files, so you don't ever lose anything. You can just click Upload here, select your document. When you're done selecting the document, I've already got a file named that in my system. I'm just going to overwrite it. And you'll see that once it's uploaded, it'll be at 100%. You can insert it, add file, and you'll notice that now it shows my file to submit. And I can either change it with the pencil, delete it with a trash can, or upload it. And that's pretty much it. And it'll tell you that the assignment's been turned in. Now, if you accidentally turn in the wrong assignment, just email me and I will reopen the Dropbox for you, as long as you email me, at a reasonable time. If you email me at 11:30 on a Sunday night when it's due, I will probably be asleep. So just make sure that you upload that fairly early, just in case something happens. But that's the reading response. And then our textbook assignment number 1, or our thesis assignment rather. This is going to go along with paper 1. All our thesis assignment is it's 10 points, and it's just you telling me what you're writing about. What's your topic? What are you going to write about? And you submit it there. And what our paper 1 is about, I'm going to pull up our guidelines and show you. So paper 1, the topic of it is prose. So this can take many, many formats. This is a very, very open-ended assignment with lots of options. So it has to have something to do with prose, something to do with fiction or nonfiction. So you've got a couple options, and here's what they are. You can, if you want to go the creative writing route, you can write a short story. I've had lots of students pick this option. I've seen students write stories about dystopian, sci-fi. I've had students write like crime noir, students writing like a romance story. Keep it PG, please. Keep it college appropriate. But I've had students write lots of papers that they just made up the characters, made up the stories, and I'm all about that. If you want to go the creative writing route with this paper, by all means you can, because your paper has to incorporate the 7 elements of fiction. It has to have a plot, characters, a setting, some symbolism, a point of view, a purpose, a theme, and a style. So absolutely your paper, if you create your own short story, is probably going to have those 7 elements in them. So that's perfectly fine. If you don't want to create your own short story, you can do a creative nonfiction about yourself. So a short narrative about something that's happened in your life. You can write a story about that. You can do a memoir, so you can do something like a diary entry. If you want to be all personal and stylistic with it, you can make it like Diary of Anne Frank, make it a diary journal format, go with it. And you have the option of doing a fan fiction if you want to be creative. If you don't know what fan fiction is, you probably won't choose this option. But if you do know what fan fiction is, it's basically taking an author's previously published work and either changing a part of it or adding on to the story. So I've had students do Harry Potter fan fiction. I've had probably one of the most memorable ones is I had a nursing student that did a crossover fan fiction where she did the main 3 characters of Grey's Anatomy and had them meet up with the characters from The Hangover in Vegas. And shenanigans ensued. It was a lot of fun, and it was a really cool story, and she had a lot of fun creating it. So I'm all about that. If you are wanting to be creative and have a good time writing a story, by all means. But if you are not a creative writing person and you're like, I do not want to make up my own story, that is fine. You can do an analysis of a short story and just do a very traditional paper. It can be a short story from our textbook, or it can be a short story that maybe you own. So by all means, you don't have to be creative if you don't want to. You can do a very straightforward paper, but I do have a lot of students that want to do something creative based for this first assignment, and so I want to give you a lot of options to choose from. So whatever option you pick, I want to know that for your thesis statement. I want to know which of these options you picked and just a very, very, very brief synopsis of what you're writing. No structure yet. We'll talk about outlines next week, but just a basic synopsis of what you're doing. Your paper itself has to be 3 to 5 full pages, like not 2.5 pages, 3 full pages. It can be over 5. Your paper can be over 5 pages, but it needs to at least be in that 3 to 5 page range. 12-point font, 1-inch margins, double-spaced, no bold, cursive, or large fonts, please. And I was a college student, guys. If you try to wiggle around this, I'm going to call you out on it. I do have students that try to change the margins, that try to use Arial bold or Arial large, and I'm like, no. So trust me when I say this. If you try to wiggle your way around these guidelines, I will call you out on it and be like, nope, not going to work. So just make sure to adhere to these guidelines and you'll be fine. Grammar and spelling should be in Standard American English. You do not need a works cited for this first paper, so we're not going to talk about MLA yet. You don't need a works cited for this very first paper, unless you either quote something or you list any type of research about your fan fiction. So if you do anything about Grey's Anatomy and you want to give me any character bio information, then you need to cite that source. But otherwise, as long as you turn your paper in on time and it meets these guidelines, you should be good to go. Due dates, your thesis proposal of what you're going to write about is due this coming Sunday, August 30th. Oh my goodness. I'm going to change that. Sorry about that, guys. And then your outline is going to be due the next week, and then the final draft. So the next week, let me check my due dates here. Oh goodness. So the next, your outline is actually going to be due September 5th and then the 12th. So that does change a little bit. I'll change these due dates, guys, and get this reposted. Sorry about that. But if you have any questions, you can always email me too. But that is the thesis statement for this first paper. All right. So you have your reading response, your paper 1 thesis, and your discussion forum due. The discussion forum itself for week 2 is just talking about the elements of fiction. So I want to know, I want you to give me an example piece of prose. This can be a TV show, a book, a movie, since those are technically scripts. And then I want you to tell me, whichever your example is, what is the most effective or best element of fiction used, and what is the most least effective. So for example, I would say, if I did the example of Toy Story, Pixar's Toy Story, as my example of a piece of prose, I would say the best element that it uses is probably characters. The characters of Toy Story are all distinct. They're very easy to differentiate. They have complex characterizations. They're funny. They're fun. They're very engaging. That's probably the best part about Toy Story are the characters themselves. They're the most iconic part. The least effective element is probably setting. I mean, we get a setting, but there's not really a specific time frame given for the story. We don't actually get to see much of the setting other than Andy's room and Sid's room and the arcade. That's pretty much the only places we go to, and even then they're very contained and tight. We don't actually get to see the expansion of the setting itself. So I would say that's the most least effective element. That's the type of questions that I'm asking for this discussion forum, to just give me an example and tell me the most effective and least effective element of fiction involved. And we have a variety of classmates with different career choices and likes and dislikes, so I'm really excited to see what you all put down for this example for this discussion forum. Very curious. But yeah, those are the assignments for this week. You can see them in course content. Make sure that you scroll down to the actual week to see the assignments, and you can even go down a few extra weeks to see the assignments later on, so that's helpful. But we're going to round out talking about week 2 with the first few chapters of our textbook, chapters 1 through 4. And we're going to go back up here and talk about part 1, Discovering Literature, chapters 1 through 4. So chapter 1 is just a preview in our book, so it's just discussing how do you interact with prose. And it gives us a checklist of things to do. So obviously the big one is you have to go into these stories with an open mind. Be ready for things to be, expectations to be subverted, questions to be asked of you, the reader. And the hardest one of this list is probably the second one, and that's reading the story more than once. Because We live in a fast-paced society. You guys have multiple classes that you're taking. You may have jobs, you may have kids, you may have things going on in your life. So asking someone in modern day America to read a story more than once is actually a pretty taxing request. When we get to poetry and start talking about poetry, I think it's a little bit easier to read poetry multiple times. But for short stories and novels, that can be hard to do. So you really have to pay close attention the first time you read a story to try to get all the details that you can. Obviously, like I said, I have little cousins, so we watch a lot of cartoons, and you got to use your imagination, get all the SpongeBob rainbow going, and use your imagination when it comes to these stories. Allow your emotions to come into play, because chances are the author wants you to have a visceral, emotional response to that text. Get a sense for the story as a whole. What is the author's purpose? What are they trying to get across to their readers? Think about how your reactions matter, and talk with other readers. And luckily, that last one's going to be easy because we are in an online class with a discussion forum. So you will very much have the chance to talk to other readers in the class about the texts that we go over. So I'm excited about that. There are 7 elements of fiction. There are setting, which is not only where we are, but also when we are. Time is an important element of the setting. Characters, who? Are they humans? Is it like Brave Little Toaster and they're all inanimate objects? Is it an animal? Is it a force of nature? Who is the character of the story? The plot, what happens? Point of view, who is telling the story? From what perspective is it? Symbolism, does the story have meaning beyond itself? This can be with colors, with names, with objects in the story, and we'll talk more about this later. Symbolism, theme, does the story have a purpose? What does it make you think? And then finally the style, how does the author construct it and what type of language do they use? So these 7 elements of fiction or 7 elements of prose are a necessity if you want to have a good story. You cannot have a good story without all 7 of these. You can have a story without all 7, but it won't be as good as if it incorporates all of these elements. Setting and character, this is just a run through of a few terms that are highlighted in these chapters. Setting and character, your narrator is important, and your narrator also depends on the point of view, which we'll come back and talk about later. Dialogue is the verbal exchange between characters. I'll be honest, guys, when I was I went to SIC and then I transferred to Illinois State to complete my degree in English, and I was in a creative writing class, and one of our assignments, our creative writing instructor told us to go to the local coffee shop that was right across campus, and she said, I want you to go in there and sit for 30 minutes one day this week, and I want you to eavesdrop on a conversation and write it down. And I was like, that's creepy. But I did it. And honestly, the entire class, even though a lot of us were kind of uncomfortable with the fact that we were eavesdropping on someone's conversation, it's a great exercise if you want to know how to write realistic dialogue. Because how we talk in reality is nothing, most of the time, like how we talk in prose. I'll use Stephen King as an example. Stephen King is a classic example of an author who writes very, very, very lengthy, wordy dialogue, but a lot of it doesn't sound like how actual people talk. It sounds like how a writer would imagine people talk. So I definitely recommend, if you are going to do creative writing, go out and just listen to a conversation and write down exactly what people say, and you'll find that it's a lot choppier, it's a lot less wordy, and it's a lot more direct usually than how we see in novels. And I've got an example of dialogue here below. The important thing is to look at how punctuation is placed. We have like a quotation mark inside the quotation marks, and the same thing is a comma here inside the main thing is your punctuation needs to go inside the quotation marks, okay? And you can kind of see that here. With plot and point of view, we have the term suspense, which is just how our attention is held through mystery and intrigue. And we also have point of view. And I like on page 37 that they describe point of view as whose eyes are we looking at the world. So we have 3 points of view. We have first person, which is myself. I do things or things happen to me. We have second person, which is probably the least used point of view, which is you do things. And then we have third person, which is he or she, and it's referring to someone else. So when we get to the point of view chapter, we'll talk more about these three perspectives, but first and third are the most used. Second person is arguably the hardest to write in, and therefore is the least used of these perspectives. Symbolism and theme. Symbolism is just referring to something with meaning beyond itself. So this can be colors, names, mythology. J.K. Rowling in Harry Potter, she uses a ton of symbolism. And when you guys read Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants, there will be some symbolism in that as well that you're going to get asked about. Theme, what is the meaning of the story as a whole? I like the term texture that our book gives. It just refers to details that make a story rich, that are kind of a web of different things kind of coming together to create this tapestry that is the story. And then first impressions versus running commentary. So first impressions is just if you watch or read something in its entirety and then you think about it or comment afterwards, versus a running commentary is like you're taking notes as you're watching. And I kind of, in my spare time, I like to write little blogs and little reviews about shows that I've watched. And I've done both. Sometimes I like first impressions because you can kind of focus on the entire show and then write about it. But you might also forget something and not get to mention it later. Whereas running commentary, you're making all your notes, so you're not forgetting anything, but you're also not invested in the show or invested in the reading, so it kind of takes away from it. So there's pros and cons to both, but that's the difference between them. So types of brainstorming, you've probably talked about this in English 109 and English 121, but they list some forms here, and our Cengage handbook has some other forms as well, such as brainstorming, clustering. I'm a lister personally. I don't like clustering at all. I'm more, let's write down a list. A capsule portrait, which you can see on the slide here, is just a capsule portrait is nice if you guys are going to do the creative writing option for paper 1, because it will let you make a little portrait, not a physical drawing, but a portrait of your character in the story. So what are their likes? What's their personality? What do they dislike? What do they look like? It's a nice little bio that you can make for your characters to help get in the mindset of that, and it will help you write those characters into your stories. Chapter 2 talks about types of setting, and I really like the 4 examples that they give us. These will be on your prose test, so make note of these. There are 4 types of setting: mirror, mold, escape, and alien. A mirror setting reflects the mood of the story. So if it's a very dystopian story, maybe it's in a grungy city or in a desert. I always think of Star Wars when the droids and the stormtroopers are combing through the desert. There's kind of this sense of like desperation and isolation there. That's a mirror setting. The opposite of that is a mold setting, which shapes your characters. So I think of Orange is the New Black. Your characters being stuck in a prison, it kind of starts to mold their character and shape who they are. That's a mold setting. An escape setting is an imaginary or a dreamlike place. It could also be like a place away from reality. So I think of Alice in Wonderland, Doctor Who, just places that kind of escape the norm. And then finally, there is the alien setting, which is not talking about outer space aliens. It's talking about the unknown, a loss of home. It can be space, but it could also be like moving to a different country or going somewhere entirely different. Just something that's alien or unknown to the characters in the story is an alien setting. So, as far as dialogue goes and relating to it, we have these 2 terms: stream of consciousness, which I always think of Alice in Wonderland. I think the stream of consciousness is going from point A to point B to point C at a kind of a rapid pace, sometimes without even organization. And then we have interior monologue. And page 60 talks a little bit about interior monologue, but I just want to mention it here. When we get to drama, we will go over it in much more detail. Chapter 3 talks about characters. So we have round characters versus flat characters. Round characters are 3-dimensional, they're complex, they have motivation and depth. They're usually your main characters of the story. And flat characters are just one-note background characters. They don't have much personality, They're kind of stereotypes. They're very generalized. Think of in Beauty and the Beast, Belle is a rounded character. She has motivations, she has thoughts, a personality, she has depth to her character. And then think of all the townspeople in that opening song. That's like, bonjour, bonjour. Think of all them. They don't have personality. They're just stock characters going through the motions and singing the song. That's it. That's the difference between your round versus flat characters. An initiation is a rite of passage that a character takes from one point to the next. You guys are going to notice I'm going to mention a lot of Disney movies because, like I said, I have younger cousins. We watch a lot of Disney. So I think of Finding Nemo when they do the shark bait hoo-ha-ha and they do the little trial through the lava pit in the little fish tank. That's an initiation scene. And it also plays a point because it gets Nemo's character to become part of the crew. So it's like a little rite of passage that is also a plot point in the story that gets us to the next point moving on. So persona is a hidden personality. Persona often is a mask that a character wears. So if a character seems really nice, but in reality they're not, that's a persona. So in Mean Girls, for example, Regina George has a persona of being this very happy, beautiful, popular girl. But in reality, we know that that's all a mask to hide how she really is. So that's a persona. And then minimalist are very simple characters that have only essential traits for the story. So again, in Hills Like White Elephants, you all are going to see with Hemingway that his characters are very minimalist. We may argue even that they're not even round characters, they're flat. And so I'm curious to see what you guys all think of that as we read that story this week. Chapter 4 is about plot, and the big term from Chapter 4 is on exposition. Exposition is just a way for plot information to get to us, the reader. So especially if a story takes place in a world that is unlike our own, we need some kind of context. We need a way to understand what's going on. So oftentimes exposition is given to a character to give us bits and pieces of important information. And so what I'm going to do right here is show you guys a clip. It's from Pirates of the Caribbean, the first one. And arguably it's probably one of my favorite examples of exposition because it is executed perfectly. And there's so much about this scene that ties into the entire story, to the characters, that we'll briefly talk about it, but I first want to show you guys the clip.
You, Sparrow.
Aye.
You're familiar with that ship, the Black Pearl.
I've heard of it.
Where does it make berth?
Where does it make berth? Have you not heard the story? Captain Barbosa and his crew of miscreants sailed from the dreaded Isle of Demersa. It's an island that cannot be found except by those who already know where it is.
The ship's real enough. Therefore its anchorage must be a real place. Where is it?
Why ask me?
Because you're a pirate.
And you want to tell by yourself, is it?
Never. They took me swarm.
Oh, so it's easily found out. I see. Well, if you're intending to brave all, hasten to her rescue and so win fair lady's heart, you'll have to do it alone, mate. Ask for no profit in it, Fanny.
I can get you out of here.
How's that? The keys run off.
I'll help build these cells. These are half-pin barrel hinges. With the right leverage and a proper application of strength, the door will lift free.
What's your name?
Will Turner.
It'll be short for William, I imagine. Good strong name. No doubt named for your father, eh?
Yes.
Well, Mr. Turner, I changed my mind. If you spring me from this cell, I swear on pain of death, I shall take you to the Black Pearl and your one place to be ever called. Agreed. Get me out.
Hurry, someone will have heard that.
My head.
All right. So I love this scene for a number of reasons. One, it explains everything that we need to know about the Black Pearl, about the curse, about this kind of supernatural phenomenon associating everything. So it gives us all those bits of information about the plot that otherwise we wouldn't know. But it also does a lot to explain our characters. It explains that Will does not like pirates, so he's against piracy. So him helping out Jack speaks volumes into how he views his relationship with Elizabeth. We learn that Jack has a sneaking suspicion about Will based on what his name is and where he got that name. We learn that Will is a blacksmith, so he knows a lot about how things are put together. So it gives us all of this information about the characters and the plot and the setting, all in this one little 2-minute scene. And us knowing that as the audience sets up the rest of the movie, and it makes future plot points so much smoother and easier for us to understand because we've had this scene to back it up. That's the importance of exposition. So there's that. But I just want to show you guys that scene because I really, really, really like it. In terms of other things about plot that are noteworthy, we have our protagonist and our antagonist. So the protagonist is our main character in the story, and our antagonist is just the person that's trying to keep them from their goal. So protagonist and antagonist, good thing to note about that, does not mean good guy versus bad guy. Does not mean that, because your protagonist, like in the movie Megamind or in some other movies, your protagonist can be a villain. It can be an anti-hero, or it can be a good person. It's just the main character. And your antagonist does not have to be evil. It's just the person or the object or the force of nature that is in the way from them accomplishing their goals. We have external versus internal conflict, which are the actions. External happens inside the world that the characters are in. Internal is within the characters themselves. And then we have loose narrative versus tight narrative. A loose narrative is a story that has a very meandering, kind of vague structure. It just kind of goes from point to point, whereas a tight narrative has a very specific cause-effect structure. So think of with a loose narrative, think of a show like Seinfeld, where there's not really any direct plot thread. It's just characters doing things every episode, and the plot just kind of wanders. Whereas shows like Yellowstone, or shows like that have a distinct, you've got to watch each episode to know what happens, that's a tight narrative. And then finally we have flashbacks, which are just breaks in the chronological timeline where we go back and see a character's past. And I think that most of us have probably read a book or watched a show that has a flashback in it. It's a pretty commonly used plot device. And then our last slide is going to be finishing up our terminology on plot, closure, climax, and resolution. So closure is on page 137, and that is wrapping up everything together. Climax is on page 165, which is the highest point of the action, and resolution is the ending of the story right after the climax. So what I've done here is there's this little chart for you guys. There's setup, the start of the plot. Usually this inciting incident is what sets the plot in motion. And then from there, the action rises, it builds to the climax, and then we have our resolution. Now normally, your resolution happens kind of up here where the falling word is. This is more like Return of the King, where there's like so many endings and it just keeps on dragging on. But usually your roller coaster goes like up and then it just kind of drops off at the top. It doesn't go all the way back down. But a good story will have rising action, a climax, and a resolution to kind of keep their readers interested and to just build the story. If you don't have rising action, it's just a flat story, and that's not fun, right? So anyway, this slideshow is on your resources and handouts if you want to go back through it and check everything. I know I probably talked pretty quickly through that, but it is available if you want to go see it. As for this video, we're about done. I'm going to update those dates on the Paper One guidelines and resubmit that for you all, and then our week 2 video will be listed right here. But that's it for week 2, guys. You've just got your discussion forum, your reading response, and I want to know the thesis of your first paper. So far, your discussion forums have been fabulous. I really loved getting to learn about you guys in week 1. I think that we're going to have a very fun discussion forum based on everybody involved, which makes me excited. So I'm really curious to see how you guys react to white elephants, to see your reading responses, and to see what you guys are going to talk about for this first paper. I'm pretty interested in what you all are going to write about. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. But otherwise, I hope you all have a very safe week. Stay safe, take care, email me with any questions, and otherwise, I will talk to you all again very soon.